Now, you've written so far 24 books in your life. What do you, well, since you and I have last spoken, you've written 3 books, and that's 3 books in about 12 months. How do you get the time?
Well, I had been working on Jose Santos' biography called Above It All, The Turbulent Life of Jose Santos. I had been working on that as my previous book had been coming out, a bio of another Hall of Fame jockey, Randy Romero. And then Captain Freelance, the check is in the mail, which points out how wonderfully financially rewarding being a freelance writer can be. And it's self-deprecating humor, and I had more material than I could possibly use. And I had been working on and off on that for 4 or 5 years, so it wasn't like I started from scratch. And most recently, a handicapping book called Beat the Favorite, and again, I had been tooling around with that for a couple of years, so I know how to write them, I just haven't figured out how to sell them. And that's the really important part, selling them, right?
Well, the Jose Santos book, Above It All, is very, very interesting. How did you get to meet Jose Santos?
Well, I knew him a little bit just because I was covering New York thoroughbred racing, and he was a Hall of Fame jockey, and he won the Derby and Preakness with Funnyside. And I actually got a call from a good friend of his named Bob Goodman, who runs an ad agency in Miami Beach, and he called me up out of the blue, and this is about 2.5 years ago, told me you should be doing another book. And at the time I was writing Randy Romero's book, but nobody knew that. So I said, well, I am writing another book, but how do you know about it? He goes, no, you should be doing a book on Jose Santos. So there are certain people that if you have an opportunity to do their biography, to me it's a no-brainer. And both Randy Romero and Jose Santos were no-brainers. He's got a fascinating life. I learned a lot about him. I didn't know how he had spent so much of his childhood in extreme poverty, and I really didn't know he had ridden in Colombia for 6 years. He got addicted to cocaine, and he came to the United States, and when he took his first step off the plane, he promised himself he would never use cocaine again, and he didn't. But he only came with $2,000 and a suitcase. He couldn't speak a word of English, and before his money ran out, he was so good that people started using him as a writer there. And then he moved up to New York very, very quickly. And when you go to New York and do well there, well, then you have a career to build on, and he had a fascinating career.
It seems like so many of the people that start out in sports come out of poverty, and another person you've interviewed and observed is Mike Tyson, and sometimes it works out well for them. They are able to overcome their problems like Jose Santos did, but the others, like you find Mike Tyson was not able to. And also you find that people take advantage of them and don't consider them people, they just consider them objects to make money on.
Yeah, they consider them commodities, exactly. Mike Tyson's one of the stories in Captain Freelance, and when I was still at the Times-Union, I was able to do a Sunday feature on Mike Tyson. At the time he was 17, he was in Catskill, he was with Hall of Fame trainer Customato and local fighter Kevin Rooney, who in himself was a great boxer, and I got to go down there and watch him spar and work out and everything, and he was 17 at the time, was before all the bad stuff happened, and just watching him spar, that was rather amazing. And then I talked to him for like a half hour, and he told me how he very well could have gotten killed in street gangs in the city while growing up and everything. And it was amazing, because when Customato first trained him, he said he could be the next heavyweight champion of the world, and he was.
Well, it's very interesting. It's been said that one of the worst things that happened to Mike Tyson was Customato's passing, because he didn't have that umbrella or that guidance or protection.
Right. Cus took him into his house, he and his wonderful sister, Emile, and he was a father figure to Mike. And then also, besides losing him, he lost his manager, Jimmy Jacobs, I think his name was, and between those two, he was kind of on his own, and that was not a good thing for him, obviously, and then all the other stuff. But you know, I remember we went to a fight when he was at RPI, and this was on his way to fighting for the championship, and it was electric. The field house was jammed, and it was amazing. There was just such a local buzz to that and everything, and you know, he became one of the youngest heavyweight champions of all time.
Well, that's it comes up in your book, Captain Freelance. We're talking about two books here at the same time. Getting back to your Jose Santos book, after it was suggested to you that you write a biography of Jose Santos, what made you decide to go to the next level and write that book?
Well, I met him, he came up to Saratoga, he's got friends up here. At the time he was living in Florida, and he came up here and we talked about it, and yeah, I just thought that it was a ton of material to work with, and I explained to Jose that when I do a book, a biography, I write third person. The only times I use first person is when I make fun of myself, which is all I do in Captain Freelance, as you well know, and all that is true. But Jose is a very nice man, completely different from Randy Romero in their emotional upbringing, but two incredibly nice people in the same way. Had individual careers that with totals for wins and everything that was almost identical. And Jose, I quickly learned, was willing to talk about anything in any part of his life and be completely frank about it. And there's some stuff in Jose's biography about his womanizing and his addiction to cocaine while he was in Colombia. And he had no trouble talking about it, which made my job a great deal easier.
It seemed like in the book he was lamenting the fact that he had neglected his family for 5 years, and when he arrived in Miami and began to turn his life around, he started to take care of his family. Oh,
the first thing he did, he bought them a new home and everything, but when he went from Chile to Colombia, he was supposed to send money home every month, and he did it the first month, and then he didn't do it again for 5 years. And he felt very guilty about doing that. And when he got to the United States, you know, he asked himself, what can I do to make my life better? And he said the answer was obvious. He had to give up cocaine. And then his immense talent took over. But Randy Romero wrote in a style that was not very smooth and everything, and Jose was the exact opposite, very smooth. He looked great on a horse, but they both were able to get their horses to win races. So.
Now, Jose Santos won the Breeders' Cup, the Kentucky Derby, and he also won the Preakness. Just incredible accomplishments. Want to talk about those accomplishments a little bit?
Well, winning the Derby for any jockey or trainer, they'll tell you that, you know, if they're on an airplane and you say, somebody asks, what are you doing? They say, well, I'm in horse racing. The first question they always ask is, did you win the Kentucky Derby? So it's like every jockey's dream, every trainer's dream. And what made that fascinating, of course, was Funnyside was a New York bred gelding with a great story. Jack Knowlton formed Saratoga Partners from a barbecue, you know, at Sackett's Lake with 5 of his friends from high school, and they threw in some money. It's a great story, and Jose gets on this horse and wins the Kentucky Derby. And then, of course, documented in the book is a week after winning the Derby, the Miami Herald falsely accused him of using a buzzer or cheating to win the race, which was patently absurd to begin with, because first off, it's the Kentucky Derby. There are 3 trillion photos of every spot during the race, as well as in video of every spot. And what was interesting with that is that through the stretch, Jose had the whip in his right hand, switched it to the left, switched it back to the right. Now, if he's doing that while holding something, then he's got to be Houdini. And also right after the race, he patted Funnyside on the neck, and then Edgar Prado pulled up his horse and shook hands with him. So, and all the Miami Herald had to do, they had pictures of Jose holding up his whip like this, and behind Jose was Empire Maker, the favorite in the Kentucky Derby, and the Silks of Jerry Bailey, who was riding him, showed up through this little hole, and they concluded that it was an object. And one of my favorite lines in the book is Funnyside trainer Barkley Tagg said they could have gone to Walgreens, spent $5, and that would have been the end of it. Recently
we did a radio interview, and you talked about the Miami Herald situation, and if you could elaborate a little more than you did on the radio. It seemed to me that because Jose Santos was not that proficient in the English language at that time, and I understand he's much better now, much more proficient, that there may have been a communications problem between Jose and the writer, but at the same time, it would seem to me with all the video and photo documentation and so many people there at the race, that they would have checked a little further before almost destroying the man's career and life.
Yeah, well, it did have a terrible effect on Jose and his family. I mean, when Jose found out, this was 1 week after the Derby, 1 week before the Preakness, the second leg of the Triple Crown, and he was with his son on the backstretch at the track kitchen, and he was with his agent. His agent got a call from somebody in Florida that the Herald ran this story, and so Jose found out. His son was there, and it was very traumatic. And you know, he got barbecued by the New York fans because it alleged he cheated, and you know, it was quickly proven wrong. But they based that whole story in a single phone interview of Jose from the Miami Herald calling him in the jockeys room at Belmont Park. And Jose's English has gotten a lot better, but it's still not 100% even now. So we're talking about, you know, 8 years ago. And I laugh because I think of this story when he first got to Florida. He went to a diner and the waitress asked him what he wanted, and he said yes, and she said, no, what are you going to eat? And he said yes, and Jose said that kind of kept on going for 6 hours. So he went to the store and cooked for himself because he said he would have starved. But there was this great piece of journalism. There was an alternative Palm Beach weekly that I was able to get a hold of, and the editor of that had worked for the Miami Herald for years and years, and he documented how the story was done and whatever, and how it wound up in print. And as a journalist, I mean, it really bothers me, you know, for somebody not doing their homework, but this was, I mean, it was egregious. And after, you know, it was quickly proven that it was absolutely, you know, blameless, but the perception was still there. And for them not to call Jose back, the story in the Palm Beach Post pointed out that Miami's got the largest Hispanic population of any city in the United States, and they based the sensational, damning story on a single phone conversation with somebody who doesn't speak good English.
Do you think the reporter or the newspaper had it out for Jose Santos?
I don't think so. I knew one of the people. It was a nice man named Frank Carlson. He actually had a magazine I did stories for, but he didn't do his homework, and it was very interesting because he first asked Jose, did you have something else in your hand besides the whip? And Jose thought he was talking about a Q-ray bracelet. Now there's a thing called a Q-ray bracelet that goes around your wrist, and because of magnetism or whatever, it's supposed to help your arthritis. And Jose had gotten a gift from his second wife, Rita, that bracelet, and he was wearing it because he was starting to get arthritis in his arm and hand and whatever. So he thought he was alluding to that, and he said, a Q-ray bracelet. And Frank said, well, what does it do? And he says, it cures arthritis. Well, when the story ran the next morning in the Herald, it said that Jose had a Q ring, which nobody had ever heard of, and it's used to call out riders instead of cure arthritis. So that's really, really bad. And as bad as the reporter wasn't doing that, I think the editors were even worse. How do you let a story like that run? And I remember finding out about it that day and saying, what in God's name is a Q ring? And I went on Google, I called all my friends that are racing riders. Nobody had ever heard of it, so how did it run in the Herald story without explaining what it was?
Well, after that devastating article, he was able to turn things around very quickly in his career. You want to chat about that?
Well, the Kentucky Racing Commission had to call a hearing.
Right.
So the story broke on a Saturday morning. They had a press conference Monday morning to exonerate him of everything, and the Miami Herald did wind up paying for that mistake in a lawsuit by Jose that he won.
Right.
But in Jose's mind, he was already guilty. And I mean, he had a brother that rides in Norway, and he had heard about it, and another one of his brothers got into a fight in a bar with somebody over it. That stigma was there.
Sure.
And the only way to remove that was if Funnyside came back and won the Preakness. And Funnyside won the Preakness by nearly 10 lengths, the second largest margin ever. And as Jose was crossing the finish line, first he went like this because it was the second leg of the Triple Crown. Right. Then he dramatically opened his right hand like this to show there was no buzzer.
Right.
So, but you know, it's still, you know, and I hate to say it's true, but it is that if the accusation is made in a newspaper, people believe you're guilty. But when he won the Preakness, I think all that was removed. Now,
he is doing very well now in the racing industry and still involved in horse racing, right?
Right. He has been a jockey agent, and it's funny because I did Randy Romero's biography and Jose's biography, and they both wound up becoming jockey agents and representing the same jockey, Fernando Jara, and that didn't work out either time. So Jose's a jockey agent. He's doing some other business things. He's very happy. He's very happy.